Ola Electric presents Green Bharat, an initiative by Network18.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here at the Green Bharat Summit. Of course, it's been a great day of conversations, hearing the likes of Amitabh Kant, Nitin Gadkari, and top industry veterans from the automotive industry. Clearly, we're at an inflection point. 5 years ago, I don't think we would have imagined price parity with ICE, but now we are seeing that. Look at what's happening in the market. You've got leading OEMs like Tata Motors, Mahindra, Ola Electric, TVS, Bajaj Auto, Hero, Honda, you name it. All of them are bringing out electric vehicles which are almost priced at parity with electric vehicles, with the ICE counterparts. So this is definitely an important moment for the industry. We currently have around 28 lakh EVs in India, but as an S&P report points out, the EV outlook for India, they feel that India may not have 30% EV penetration by 2030. In fact, the penetration may just be about 18%. Even Amitabh Kant today said that we're lagging behind China and many other countries, and we're 5 years behind. So clearly there is a lot to be done. And what's holding us back? Let's kick this off with Mr. Vipin Sondhi. Mr. Sondhi, let me begin by asking you for an industry view. You're someone who's been spending a lot of time brainstorming with the industry, brainstorming with policymakers about what needs to be done. 28 lakh EVs, a good milestone, but we're nowhere close to the 30% mark as yet. In fact, our ambition should be much more. What's holding us back, according to you?
No, I think, this is about both policy and while manufacturers are being looked at as well, I think we have to strengthen the ecosystem. At the end of the day, EVs is about ecosystem, so it's all together. What's also important to see is, let me pick up a few things. There's nobody more inspiring than the minister himself. So it's important to bring him on stage as often as you can in different states as well. If there's a clarity of vision, and there are areas which are not clear as well, but it inspires people. And I believe it's more about inspiration than anything else. But let me pick up, I'll come to your point later, but let me pick up 6 things that if we are to be number one as is envisioned, it can't be domestic market alone. It has to be a combination of domestic and the overseas market as well. So I'll pick up just 6 points, and then we'll come to specific policy issues. Number one, charging infra definitely is something that we are going to look at. Battery tech and recycling. Third is R&D and clusterization of R&D, bringing industry, academia onto industrial parks so that we can look at the technology of the future. Policy must address that. Fourth, a policy for startups and SMEs. We talk about them, we don't have an integrated policy. Fifth, integrating with global standards. Santosh Iyer just mentioned about the fact that there's a disparity in NCAP, that's safety standards. If we aspire to be Atmanirbhar, which is part of the global manufacturing supply chain, we must integrate with global standards. And finally, very importantly, a cross-sector collaboration between automobiles, between energy, IT. It's the ecosystem that we have to develop. I'll just take a minute and then stop. Transport is a concurrent subject which makes implementation sometimes a challenge, which is why you need a visionary leader articulating all the time. But there are compelling benefits to having a consistent policy framework. It may not be unified, but it should be consistent so that the transition is impactful. Just 3 points there. Citizens of all states must have access to the benefits. It was also said taxation at the local level, at the state level is different. All citizens don't have that access. Secondly, consistent policy has to make sure that EV adoption across states address the current disparities in the states that there is. And thirdly, standardization of policies will ensure the availability of equipment, infrastructure, and charging stations. I'll stop here, but when we come back, I'd like to talk about power and the policy on power.
You're absolutely right, sir, because when you move from state to state in the country, the regulatory ecosystem changes. The kind of subsidies you have on electric vehicles, different kinds of vehicles, that changes. The capital subsidies that you're giving on manufacturing, that's different. the taxation changes, and as you said, power tariffs, land use policies, everything is different. And that's what sometimes complicates things for global investors as well. Mr. Saikanth Varma, I'd like to get you in at this stage. Do you think, just the way we have a GST, can we have a one nation, one EV policy? Is that even feasible?
I think that is not only something that we would want, but it is pretty essential at this point of time. Because I think, like Sir was just saying, what we need is a clear visibility. I mean, there are different stakeholders that are involved, whether it is the EV manufacturers, whether there are public transportation suppliers, or logistic sectors, or mass transport, or even individual transportation users. There's battery manufacturing and a whole bunch of stakeholders which are involved. Now, what we need to give is some sort of a visibility as to what they are going to get across the nation. Because when you talk about all these stakeholders, they're not going to come and target a particular state. They're going to come for the entire country. Only then the economic scale would work out, and they'll be able to, take advantage of that. And I think one nation, one EV policy is definitely that way, is going to give them that sort of a visibility. And they can, chart out a clear roadmap in terms of what they can plan for the next 5 years, 10 years, and, whether it is building the infrastructure, which is pretty essential, for EV to take off in a big way. So I think it is not only something, a good to have factor, but it is very, very much essential. And just like how, there are many examples. You're just quoting about the GST. I think that is one of the very successful structures or models that we as a nation have come together and built it. I think in that context, EV policy for the entire country is definitely something that is very much essential. And only that will give us the ability to, have experience in exponential growth and to be able to achieve whatever targets that we're talking about, 30% or even 50%. And I think India as a country, we should target towards 100%.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Uttar Pradesh, which has the largest number of MPs in the Lok Sabha, one of India's largest states. Prerna, I would like to ask you about EV penetration in Uttar Pradesh. A state like UP has tried to align its policy, electric vehicle push policy, very much with the central government. But if I were to ask you a larger question about how bureaucracy functions differently across the country, which are some of the basic hurdles that you see at the level of governance, at the level of regulations, which are perhaps holding back widespread EV adoption in the country? What, according to you, would be some of those 2-3 hurdle points?
The Uttar Pradesh state, under the leadership of Honorable Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath ji, is very well aligning with the national policy which we have. So the Uttar Pradesh Electric Vehicle Manufacturing and Mobility 2022 policy, it's very much in sync with the FAME or the PM E-Seva Yojana, which we hear about. And when we talk of these schemes, when you talk of the alignment thing, we are now looking at faster adoption of electric vehicles. We are now looking at providing lucrative space for investors, for businesses, so that there is a holistic ecosystem of electric vehicles. Now, coming to the challenges we face, it is the first thing which I would mention is the charging infrastructure. The charging infrastructure here, of course, the upstream infrastructure has a great cost to it. But now, if the government is now subsidizing, incentivizing the infrastructure, because if it doesn't do, then the burden will fall on the consumer, and the entire concept of green technology or electrical vehicles will fall short, because we want to promote that people use EVs. We want to promote because we want to reduce our energy we want to reduce our energy import bill. We want to enhance our energy security. We want to go green. We want to have better air quality. And for all of that, the charging infrastructure, not only the cost is one issue. The second issue is that we need to have it at regular intervals. Now, the electric vehicle policy which we have in UP, it emphasizes that on expressways we should have it at 25 kilometers, every 25 kilometers. Or if we look at the internal road network in the cities, then we want it in 1 into 1 square meter. But how do we identify suitable locations for it? How do we identify land for it? We need to acquire land. We need to bear the land cost. We do have great subsidies and incentives when it comes to stamp duty reimbursement, or when we talk of
Road tax waivers.
the road tax waivers or the registration charges waivers. We definitely have that in the policy, but this is another important obstacle and important challenge we are wanting to address, because cities are becoming very congested. I am posted in Greater Noida. Of course, it's a very well-planned city, and we see that the road network is very wide. It's all very green and nice. Might not be that big an issue for us, but for the other cities, if we look at them, we want to transition about 100% of our public transport into EV, or the official vehicles into EV by 2030. Those are ambitious targets, and for that we really need to look at the infrastructure hurdles, like I talked of, the cost, the land suitability, then the electricity tariffs. Do we have that kind of electricity infrastructure? Because the grid and substations will also need to be revamped. They will also need to be strengthened. So do we, how are we going to go about it? So I think these are the major obstacles we face, and we are in line, to address these issues.
Okay, Mr. Abhijeet, as Ms. Prerna and Ms. Saikanth pointed out, and we've got two senior bureaucrats from both Uttar Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh. Interesting thing is, you go to any state in the country, everyone would say that we would want Tesla to come and manufacture here. While the jury is still out on whether Tesla will come and finally start manufacturing in India, or just begin retail operations, the fact is every state is competing. Every state wants to give the right incentives to manufacturers, give subsidies on electric vehicles, hybrids, but we don't have a coherent EV policy. When we speak about a coherent EV policy, or one nation, one EV policy, what does that need to contain? Because when we're talking about policy right now, we're talking about subsidies, and subsidies cannot last forever.
First of all, many congratulations to Network 18 team for bringing this content on a very visible and very direct mode that we need a national EV policy. The need may have been discussed behind the curtain for a long period, but now since it has came, and again you had Mr. Amitabh Kant sir in the morning, and then now you had Gadkari ji. Both of them, they are the leadership voices who has given almost outlined both in the morning the challenges that we are facing and the places where we are curve, or our speed or pace has lacked content, or sometime transition speed. And also what Gadkari ji just now said is where we are expecting to reach to. So if you will ask me that what is about not having an EV policy, I'm the one who's getting maximum hit, because I'm not having a national EV policy. Two major points which we have as a national ambition, Minister has also spoken, and that is to reduce your logistic cost. And when it comes to logistic, we are not talking or referring here one state. The transition of an electric mobility fleet, or a hydrogen truck, or electric truck, or e-highway, all of them, they have to cross multiple states. And the companies who are also going to pick up. So recently we have Amazon starting and announcing 100 EVs. Ultratech, few days back, they also had announced 100 EVs. These are the companies who had to spend a significant amount of time to understand which state, what type of conditions, what type of tariff, what type of subsidies. If we would have a national policy who gives equivalent tariff of the EV charging, at least for the vehicle. Second, the power disbursement and also the power connection, which also becomes a big problem when we go for permissions of such charging stations or highways. It is varying state to state. All regulators, they have to come together. And when it comes to give a single window clearance, it is impacting the way we want to reduce our logistic cost. And second is what we are having as a lowest hanging fruit. Sir said 40% of the pollution or emission is attributed to the transport. out of that 40%, which is the 100% of our country, 30% is alone attributed to trucks. So this year when we had FAME, we included 500 crore rupees for trucks dedicatedly to meet that deployment target of, to claim that 500 crore rupees. Ease of doing business also given 500 crore rupees for the viability gap funding. And to meet both of them together, if you will see what is the exact translation of how a state will be able to pick up is actually the ease of mobility. No matter what amount of road we will be able to create to connect cities, the moment you eat or reach to a city, you face all that congestion. You may go from here to Kanyakumari, but the moment you reach to city, your circular road or your transition road is not in a proper mode to actually surpass the city without getting slowed down. So that obstacle of mobility is what our focus. GNSS tolling ho, या फिर e-highway ho, hydrogen bus or electric bus, whatever is to be brought to make the mobility freight lower, it is priority. And any of these are not possible until and unless we have a comprehensive nationwide ambition. And plus, I would also, if time allows us, to speak about climate financing. Without having a proper single window clearance, which dispense a long-term finance for such infrastructure upgradation, it would be for, as a country, very ambitious to have a vision like this, which I think in morning, Kant has very well outlined. And last but not least, these transitions are keeping us in a neck-to-neck competition with Germany. When we started 3 years back, we were ahead of Germany into making 5,500 kilometer e-highway on Bharatmala and Sagarmala. Germany had a target of 4,000 by 2030. Now, with some advancement into certain areas like power, distribution, and solid-state transformers, we went ahead to complete our targets by 2027 only. And solar is also contributing. But when it comes to creating an infrastructure of dispensability, what Mr. Saab said is 470 wayside amenities, we will have to have a comprehensive policy that a state consumes each one of them as an asset which is earning for them.
Okay, thank you for those very comprehensive remarks. And Mr. Sondhi, to come back to you, when we speak about the necessary contours of a one nation, one EV policy, would you say that continuity of policy and streamlined policies all across the country for the power sector would be the most essential? Because even now, when we speak about adoption of EVs, they say the biggest puzzle that we need to fill is charging.
You're absolutely right. I think just to first, how do we arrive at a more unified policy with it still being a concurrent subject? And I think there should be dashboards created by the central government, which are in each state government, to highlight and showcase the best EV policies around the country. CIA is doing some work on it. So you create a healthy competition so that each state is learning from the other, and we approach unification even though it may not be formalized. Coming back to power, and that remains probably the single most important thing. You know, there are solutions to it. One is, how do you manage peak load and EV charging impact? We like to charge in areas that we know rather than in public charging. So the chances are electricity demand typically peaks between 6 and 9 p.m. and that coincides with us reaching home from office when most people would plug in their EVs. So this added demand would strain the grid, which is what the power sector or the discoms are concerned about. Now, I think a coherent EV policy would work on managing charging times and encouraging EV users to stagger their charging during off-peak hours. And there are ways to do it through incentives. The second is smart charging and a tariff arrangement. We have smart meters now. We have the ability of digital. We can easily find out which are the peaks, which are the troughs, which smart meters, and automatically the user will shift to times when he or she has to pay the least. There are ways of managing it. Technology is there. One last point, since we've got two people from the States, is modification of building codes for charging infrastructure. I think if we can do that to facilitate builders, etc., in residential accommodation, it would become easier to create the charging infrastructure within residential and commercial premises on a planned manner. I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Sondhi. Saikanth, if we were to ask you about how we can go about having a cohesive nationwide policy, if you had to put a thinking cap on, how would you start towards that?
I think, when we are targeting for a one nation, one EV policy, like what sir was saying, whether it is a power sector or whether it is the urban planning.
Because the goal of every state is the same.
Yes.
You know.
No, I think the couple of points here that we need to keep in mind is whenever we are drafting this one nation, one EV policy, because it's not just pertaining to that transport sector alone, it cuts across various sectors, whether it is power sector or whether it is urban planning, what sir was just rightly pointing out. I mean, we need to give some sort of a base structure as to what every state should look at. And when we have a very aggressive targets at a nation level that we want to, probably go at 30% by 2030 and 100% at some point of time, that basic structure should set the target for each and every state, cutting across different spaces, whether it is urban space, whether it is a building code, whether it is, the power sector, how can we ensure that, the charging infrastructure, we are able to give that sort of a confidence to the charging infrastructure players to make sure that there is a consistent and reliable power supply and all of these things. So that base structure is very, very essential. And today, aligning with this national vision, there are very few states who are able to see that, that far. And Andhra Pradesh is one of the states, we recently have launched a EV policy wherein the state has set a very, very ambitious target that it wants to achieve in the next 5 years. For example, 100% of the public road transport corporation that we have got, 100% of these vehicle fleet, which is around 15,000 vehicles, all of that is going to go EV in the next 5 years. That's a pretty ambitious target. Now, barring, we cannot just leave that for the states to decide and pick up, because sometimes at a national level, it's very important that you're able to give that sort of an ambitious target for all the states. And that I think is what the, the national EV policy should target for, to make sure that, every state is able to take this particular thing as seriously as it should. And, the other thing is, talking about the incentive should not only restrict in terms of, attracting the manufacturers, because every state has become very competitive. They are just, willing to throw away as much money as possible in terms of incentives so that they're able to attract the infrastructure, the manufacturing players. But I think this is one sector which goes beyond all of that. It's not just about giving incentives, but it is also about, providing a comprehensive framework and, giving that sort of a national visibility. Because like I said, when you're talking about EV manufacturers, they're not going to, take, for example, Andhra alone as a case study.
Yeah.
So I think, that's the kind of a framework which we need to look at when we're talking about the national level EV policy.
Right. Mr. Abhijeet, if we were to speak about ease of doing business, and One Nation, One EV policy is about ease of doing business, what are the other aspects that we need to streamline much more? What are some of the global examples that we can take as we are trying to work towards a journey? Currently, there is a major consultation on in the government about having a new automotive mission plan for 2047. Do you think we should be speaking about a One Nation, One EV policy for 2047?
Not only EV policy, but policies in respect of all concluding and dependently ministries, they are coming together. Dashboard is something which we tried in 2 years back, and now subsidies, since they are getting into sync, and we are looking at those possibilities that we may have overlooked. So expecting a country and the people to buy EV is one way of doing it. And expecting people to use EV is the other way of doing it. But you will be able to give them to use EV if somebody is going to buy EV and give them as a fleet operator. Blue Smart is a very good example of doing it. Then you have a lot of bus companies who have done. But in last 10 years, if you look at the policy, have we dispensed any ease of doing business to fleet operator or to infra? Majority of disbursement has gone to either to government institutions who have taken charges and who have taken infrastructure, or automobile manufacturers. So looking at who is actually going to help me in the agenda to reduce my climate expenditure, also my import of oil, and who is going to stand with me to increase the adoption. What Kant sir said, don't look at the number, look at the percentage. So if you look at the percentage, then percentage indicates towards the truck. So truck is what we brought into the center stage. Percentage also says that look at the adoption ratio. And adoption is not possible until and unless you create a very adoptable commercial equivalence to all industries who are currently using diesel. And how do we do it is absolutely there is no other way of conducting more and more commercial pilots, giving them an adoptability in the rate-to-rate basis that you don't spend anything. Still, I'm putting you off on a non-EV, non-fossil fuel transport system, and also a charge for your industry, for your MSME, your household to switch to renewable energy. And these two will be possible only with the conflict of commercial equivalence. Finance Ministry would have a very, very huge role to promote it, to bring each one of them together, that you are my go-to person to get this done.
Right. Ms. Prerna, what can be the starting point? Having any kind of unified policy is always a very tricky conversation. One nation, one election is a very tricky conversation with different political parties. But when we speak about one cohesive electric vehicle policy all across the country, what is the starting point? How can the government begin these discussions? Because at the end of the day, the bureaucrats will have to make such a policy and convince other states to come on board.
I think, of course, one nation, one EV policy, it's extremely essential, and it should just begin with a consultative, collaborative platform where we can have experts, we can have bureaucrats, we can have industry partners, just everybody come together from various states and work out the best model, whichever is possible. When we talk of Uttar Pradesh, we are also providing for great subsidies, incentives, everything. But then what people want is that there should be seamless travel. If they're traveling from UP to Rajasthan to Madhya Pradesh, they want the charging infrastructure to be very much seamless, to be very much properly available. So all these states need to come together and work out their power tariffs, work out their incentive policy, work out their, the waivers they can give for loans or for subsidies, incentives, all of these together. And also, there are some very good models which we find abroad also, which can again be studied. And now almost all the states have a good framework already prepared, which everybody has policies, and they're all doing their tenders. They're all making sure that we have players who are coming and putting up these charging infrastructure, or people who are coming and manufacturing electric vehicles. So these all stakeholders can come together and discuss and then just roll out the best policy possible.
Right. So lots of takeaways there. Clearly, this panel believes that yes, we do need a one nation, one EV policy for greater adoption to meet our climate goals and also to get the best investments. Clearly, there needs to be more discussion between the center and the states. We'll have to leave it there. We've completely run out of time. But I'd like to thank our stellar panelists for joining us today and leaving our audience with a lot to think about.
Thank you once again to that stellar panel. And as Parikshit said, really many takeaways from that very insightful conversation. Thank you, our stellar panel, once again. But Parikshit, we'll request you to stay back with us as we shift our focus to the other facet. Once again, a big thank you to our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now move our focus to our next discussion, which is very aptly titled the EV Diplomacy. Now, from international collaborations to policy alignment, this panel and the conversation will have a lot to unpack, really. It'll focus on how EVs can act as instruments of global cooperation. With a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin by welcoming our stellar panel. Laghu Parashar, Senior Transport Specialist at the World Bank. I'll need some enthusiasm and some cheer and applause as we welcome our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Nick McCaffrey, the Australian Deputy High Commissioner to India. Martin Amdahl, the Norway Deputy High Commissioner to India. Cedric Crowley, South African Deputy High Commissioner to India. Christina Scott, the British Deputy High Commissioner to India. Gautam Bambavle, a former diplomat. The best in the industry, as we said, the best foreign minds here on stage taking this conversation forward. Parikshit, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And this is going to be a great conversation because while we're discussing about greater adoption of electric vehicles in India and having greater exports, there is geopolitics of electric vehicles as well. And it's not just about the finished product that we're talking. All the diplomats we have on this panel now, all of them are aware about the EV challenges. EVs clearly have three aspects of geopolitics. One, you've got the critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, all of that goes into making your electric vehicle batteries. The lithium supply chain is concentrated in 2 or 3 countries like Argentina. For example, Bolivia is another. China does not have lithium, but they do control 75% of lithium processing in the world. That gives them immense leverage. Then you have electric vehicle components such as motors, electric vehicle batteries. That's again concentrated in China, Japan, and South Korea, Europe to some extent. Then you've got finished products. Even there, China is a global leader. You see how BYD is giving Tesla a tough time, tough competition all across different jurisdictions, and all of these are concerns for countries all across the world. So EV diplomacy, geopolitics of electric vehicles, and how India can stay ahead. Let me kick this off by bringing in Ambassador Gautam Bambavle. Ambassador Bambavle, let me ask you about the India view. You've served as the Indian ambassador in China, in Pakistan. What's the example we need to take from China?
Well, you know, the whole morning and even right up till the previous session, we've been hearing how India is moving ahead with leaps and bounds in the manufacture of electric vehicles. And I think here is an example where we need to, as has been said by speakers earlier today, that we not only merely have to think about the Indian market, we should also look at markets abroad. We need to be competing with the United States and with China in exporting some of our vehicles, particularly the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers, where I think we have a competitive advantage. So I think we need to look at diplomacy from this angle too, where we can help the rest of the world, particularly in the global south, to clean up our air by using more electric vehicles, some of which may have been manufactured in India.
Right. Nick, I'd like to ask you about India-Australia cooperation when it comes to electric vehicles. Yes, we have a tie-up on critical minerals. We want to deepen that further with another trade agreement. When it comes to automotive exports, yes, they've jumped because of the free trade agreement that we have. But how can India and Australia work together on electric vehicles, not just for the greater good of both the countries, but for emerging markets, for the African Union, for example?
Well, can I start by thanking you very much for the opportunity to be here and with my good friends from the diplomatic community. Can I start by saying, as you know very well, Parikshit, the relationship between our two countries, Australia and India, has really moved ahead in recent years. It has both expanded and deepened, and of course our exchange now with India also touches on the topic for your seminar today, your conference today, around Green Bharat. Australia, as many of your viewers will know, has the largest supply deposit of lithium. We are one of the world's most important countries in terms of our huge reserves around critical minerals. So it's something that we are looking to, as you noted, work more closely with India in terms of encouraging Indian involvement in the development of our critical minerals industry. I know this is a bit unorthodox, but I have here, I'm not sure whether your viewers at home can see it, but
if our cameras can zoom in.
There is a map here I have which shows you both operating mines, nickel, lithium and cobalt, for example, but also mines that are underway, under development, and then where we have proven reserves. And we are, as I said, looking to work closely with India to see if we can get more Indian involvement in the development of that industry, and they will clearly play a big part in the development of your EVs industry. So that's an alignment between Australian raw materials, Indian expertise, and then exporting to the world. So there's one practical example of what we're trying to do to assist.
So clearly, big lithium reserves in Australia, that makes it very natural for India and Australia to work together on critical minerals. Let's also get a view from Norway. And Norway, ladies and gentlemen, has become the first country to make a full transition to electric vehicles, according to several reports. Martin, if I were to ask you, this was expected. This is happening at a great pace in Norway, the transition to electric vehicles. What I would like to ask you, what are Norway's view now in terms of EV diplomacy, working with countries like India, other like-minded partners, on not just working on strengthening our own supply chain, but for strengthening it for the world and making sure the EV supply chain is not controlled by one or two countries?
Yes, thank you so much. And also let me start by thanking you for having us here today and for this very important discussion. And as you point out, Norway is the country in the world that has the largest density of electric vehicles. Last month, actually, 96.9% of all vehicles sold in Norway were electric. And from next year, 2025, the government's goal is that all vehicles, passenger vehicles sold in Norway, will be electric. And of course, it has taken time to come here. And to give you some perspective, we started in the 1990s. It took 4 years for the first 10,000 electric vehicles to be sold. And then later, it takes 4 weeks for the same number of vehicles to be sold. So the evolution has really been growing very, very fast. I think Norway has a lot to offer. We do collaborate with India on the green transition, on the electrification. We have, for example, in Norway, we have an electric vehicle association. It was started by the enthusiastic electric vehicle owners and the pioneers. They started this association. They worked very closely with the government, with the commercial partners, to adopt standards, to develop regulations. So they have really a great experience on how to change to this EV transition. And they work with a lot of other countries. They also work with enthusiasts here in India. They have been visiting recently, and they are sharing the lessons from Norway. I also think that in terms of trade, Norway and India, together with the other EFTA countries, we recently signed a free trade agreement. This will increase the trade, and green transition will be a very important part of that. One concrete example when we're talking about electric vehicles is this Norwegian company Sagavolt, which recently signed an MOU with an Indian company called Mass Tech Controls, and they will Mass Tech Controls will manufacture charging systems in India for this company Sagavolt. They will primarily first have the European and the US market as their market, but in the future, hopefully also India can be a market for that. And I think this is a really good example of how Norway and India collaborate on EV supply chains. And it's also a great example of how Norway contributes to the Make in India policy. So I believe that Norway, together with India, have a lot of good experiences that we can further enhance and also that we can share with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for those opening remarks. Christina, UK and India already have electric vehicles on the table in terms of collaboration and support.
we're talking about lower tariffs on automobiles as a category in the free trade agreement that we're discussing. British International Investments is supporting companies in India like the Mahindra Group in rolling out electric vehicles. There has been a big round of funding from them. What I would like to ask you, what's the ambition now on the UK side to work with India on electric vehicles? What more can we expect? Yes, there is a free trade agreement. It's up to you to give us some light on that. But broadly, on electric vehicles, what's the ambition between the two countries, and especially in UK?
I think we have high ambition. We have high ambition to work bilaterally with India and multilaterally with partners who are sitting on the platform as well. And as you say, there's already quite a lot of joint collaboration going on. So we see that at a government-to-government level, where for a number of years now, for example, we've been working with NITI Aayog to help design some of the low-emission vehicle systems that are needed, and that others have been talking about today. It was good to hear the minister talk about flagging off an electric bus in his speech. The company that bus belongs to is a company that was invested in by British Investment International, our investment branch. We are India's making investments into the UK. Tata Group has announced a £4 billion of gigafactory to be built in the southwest of England, recognising UK expertise in battery manufacturing, and that will be then providing batteries for the whole.
British company you're talking about buses, Switch Mobility? Switch Mobility?
Green Cell Mobility. Okay. That's right. And it's one of the big, and they've been running a platform, something like 8,000 buses now across India. So we have really high ambition. We're doing a lot already. We want to do more. I think the opportunities that will come will include things like great access to green finance, where the City of London is keen to help create innovative solutions for leveraging more money in. We do quite a lot on the government side already in terms of guarantees to the government of India for green investment. But there's probably more we can do in the green vehicle space. An FTA would help with that, and help particularly with giving confidence to British investors through a bilateral investment treaty to put their money into India and to support green transition here. So we're hopeful that we will get there, but there's lots going on despite that.
Yes, lots going on the FTA front. Cedric, we would like to ask you about India-African Union collaboration on EVs. Do you think India, as a large automotive manufacturing destination, can be a reliable supplier when we speak about diplomatic aid to countries in the African Union? Do you think EVs, electric vehicles, buses, two-wheelers, can be forms of aid with which India can support countries in the African Union with their energy transition, with their climate goals?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important discussion. I think that India and Africa can collaborate in a number of areas, not only in terms of aid and the provision of these e-vehicles, but more importantly in ensuring that Africa benefits from the critical minerals which it owns. 30% of critical minerals is located in southern Africa, for example. Now, as recently as September, the IPSA ministers issued a declaration, and they did indicate there that the country of source where these minerals are found should also benefit and form part of the value chain. And I think this is important for Africa's industrialization, for its development. So I think as countries of the South, we should work collaboratively to ensure that all of us benefit from this energy and from this transition, and to address the global challenge of decarbonizing the global economy. There are specific areas in which India and Africa can collaborate. That includes transfer of technology, training and development, development in infrastructure, including ensuring that there are sufficient energy stations to recharge. Also addressing global systemic challenges, including the imposition of taxes on countries of the South to make their exports to the North taxable in terms of the border carbon taxes, which we feel is not quite in terms of the global agreements, nor is it compatible with WTO agreements. So I think there's a number of areas where through the G20 and other fora, including perhaps the WTO, we could arrange and discuss those things. So those are my preliminary comments, and South Africa itself is quite a significant hub in terms of the automotive industry. And now we also have to adapt because as countries in the north and their regulators change and almost ban the ICE motor vehicles, we will also have to ensure that the exports meet those requirements. But in that transition, we also have to focus on a just transition, how to ensure that jobs are created, how do we still address the issue of energy security in those countries. So I think the challenges are complex, but through collaboration, through work, both South and North-South, I think we will be able to address those. Thank you.
Right, some very important comments. And, you know, as we're talking about, just ahead of this panel, we were talking about a one nation, one EV policy. Clearly, we need to have some standardization and streamlining of regulations all across countries, especially if we want to work together. Laghu, I'd like to get in a view from the World Bank. Currently, one of the major challenges to EV adoption in India is EV financing. The cost of credit, high interest rates on loans for people acquiring electric vehicles. Circularity, the recyclability of electric batteries. Now, these are very, very nascent technologies, so banks, financial institutions don't know how to bet on these for the future. We don't even know very well about the resale value of electric vehicles also so far. So what, according to you, are some of the common challenges all across the world which can be addressed?
Okay, interesting question, you know, and thanks, first of all, you know, for this interesting title of the session. EV diplomacy, I never heard about it, and I was a little worried, what will I speak in this session, you know, but thank you very much. I'll do my best. You know, you have identified all the relevant challenges, and I was just listening to you in the previous session. You talk about, you know, how long you can survive on the subsidies. It's and in a country like India, you know, you have multiple priorities. You know, EV is not the, you know, all your part of your solutions. So when you have multiple priorities and such a big scenario, and when you are targeting 30 by 30 or those kind of a target, you know, how long you can survive based on the subsidy? You need to have an instrument which unlock the commercial finance. Okay, ultimately people need to have access to the affordable financing with a terms and condition, if not less, at least at par with the ICE vehicle. Okay. Coming back to your point, I think one interesting aspect is that now, if you look at any kind of any new technology transition, you know, not only EV, be about solar panels or any, if you look at the history, you know, any transition of technology start from it take a kind of a S curve. Okay. The bottom of the S curve is always like a discovery stage. Okay. Discovery and initial stage, we can say. This is the stage when everybody is unaware about the technology, how the technology will react. We can't invest in that. That's where the government will pitch in. And that's what we are at that phase. Two-wheeler and three-wheeler, we are in the advanced stage. In buses, public buses, we are at a, you know, again at a advanced, at the bit of a commercial stage. But when it comes on school buses, when it comes on intercity buses, we are still at an initial stage. We are, as you said, the commercial banks are still not lending. Okay, that's a lot of reluctance is there. So the ultimate, you know, while it's very important for government to provide the infrastructure, invest hugely in the infrastructure, be it power infrastructure or the charging infrastructure or through the subsidy, so that some confidence should come into the market. Because unless the vehicles will come into the market, how will the ecosystem will understand the performance of the those particular vehicles? That started happening. Now what is the way forward? We have reached at that level. So Bert is talking about our fascinating story of the e-bus, what India has done. You know, through the aggregation, through those grand challenge model, which in such a complex country with a 3 level of, I would say, democracy, we achieved that kind of a grand challenge and aggregation and reduced the total cost of ownership buses by 30% in 2 years of time, you know, even without subsidy. So that's the fascinating story which we are creating. Now, what is the way forward? The way forward would be we need to create an instrument, de-risking instrument, where each 1 rupees of the government can unlock the 10 rupees of the commercial banks. Okay, that's where we need to go in that direction. And as a bank, you know, so when we talk about the World Bank, we have 3 arms. One is the World Bank, which I belong to, IBRD, which lend to the national and subnational government. One is the IFC, International Finance Corporation, which work with the corporates and and we have AMIGA, which is guarantee arm of international investment arms for multilateral. So all we collectively called as a World Bank group, and we are working on a multiple de-risking and credit enhancement instrument, where the leveraging ratio of public money, I also call World Bank money as a public money. Ultimately, we have a shareholders across the globe. How that $1 can be leveraged into at least $5. It should not be a ratio of 1:1. Otherwise, it's a subsidy.
Right.
Okay. So we call it a de-risking instrument. So how the ecosystem can work, and where we work with the kind of a commercial banks that you go ahead, you lend. If something bad happened, you have a backstopping.
We'll take care of it.
We will take care of it. So that's why we are working in those direction, how to leverage the financing. And when I talk about the S-curve, okay, and that the whole purpose is to take from stage 1 to the commercial financing stage, commercial uptake, where the government role should remain only the enabling policy and the regulations. And the lending should work on an autopilot mode.
Right. Now, that's a very important point. And Cedric, if we can get you in at this stage, what Laghu spoke about from a World Bank perspective is that they are providing de-risking instruments. Governments in some countries are coming in as guarantor of loans being given to the EV sector. Do you think this is how countries in the African Union can be supported with their EV transition? Do you think that is an area we can work together?
I think that is quite significant that those loans, if it can be de-risked, because if you look at the interest that African countries pay towards the World Bank, the high levels of those interests compared to countries in the north is partly as a result of the risk, the perceived risk that African loans pose. So if the World Bank and other financial institutions can de-risk it, it will make the loan cheaper and therefore finance available. So that is one way of doing it. So that's on the financing part. But I think that a country like India, for example, you have your internal market, but if you create your industries also on the continent through the continental free trade area, the African continental free trade area, you have access to all of those markets, 1.3 billion people. So I think there's also an incentive for Indian companies to set up factory within the continent and not just export, and thereby accessing a market of 1.3 billion people. That market, through the African Union and its countries, also have access to the European market and through ALGOA, through the USA, through ALGOA. So I think there's significant incentives in terms of the free trade agreements that Africa have and the African countries, and the creation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement to incentivize Indian companies to set up factories in the continent and to contribute to the production capacity of the continent
So
itself.
Indian companies make in Africa for the greater good, create more employment, and make cheaper vehicles rather than importing vehicles which are expensive. That is a good point. Let me get in Mr. Bambable once again. Ambassador Bambable, is the geopolitics over electric vehicles set to worsen, set to fire up even further with Trump in the White House?
Well, there are going to be some kind of higher tariffs on certain countries. We'll have to wait and watch which those countries are. But without answering your question, as you know, Parikshit, since my retirement from the Indian Foreign Service, I've been involved with Ola Electric. And I want to give this whole concept of EV diplomacy a kickstart by inviting each of these gentlemen and ladies who are on the stage to come and see our Ola Electric factories, which are just outside Bangalore in Tamil Nadu. I would like to invite them all to come and see us, because seeing is believing. And you can visit both the two-wheeler factory as well as the cell factory. This is an open invitation. I do hope you will take it up, and my colleagues from Ola Electric are here today. So we will follow up with all of you and give EV diplomacy a kickstart.
That's a great point, sir. And I'm sure they would all like to visit the factory and see what Ola is doing in terms of breakthroughs in EV manufacturing and cell manufacturing as well. Martin, if I were to come to you, looking at the geopolitical challenges, looking at the change in administration in the US under Biden has already slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. The European Union has also slapped very high tariffs. So where does Europe want to go with these high tariffs on China, and where does that leave room for cooperation with countries like India?
Thank you. That's a very, very challenging question. But first, thank you so much for that invitation. I'm sure that all Norwegians would feel very welcome at your factory. Ola is, as you probably know, the most common first name for a Norwegian man. So we will feel very welcome. So thank you. I think rather maybe than answering that quite challenging question, I would like to tell a little bit from the Norwegian story and how we managed to actually become this country with the highest density of electric vehicles, because I do understand that that's the direction that India also wants to take, and maybe some of the lessons may be useful. And I think that you did touch upon this very much in your previous session, you know, on policies in Norway. The government introduced lots of privileges to people driving electric vehicles. So, for example, even when you drive an electric vehicle, you can drive in the bus lane, so you avoid jams. You can park for free, and parking is normally very expensive. Tax and toll are exempted for electric vehicles, and also the insurance premium is lower for electric vehicles. So that is in terms of economic or policies, basically. And then, of course, when you buy an electric vehicle, it's much cheaper than buying a normal vehicle. Also, the government has invested very robustly in the what do you call it, the infrastructure. So charging stations, they are now available everywhere, and this has of course led to this transition to electric vehicle, but also it has made a lot of technology development. It has made a lot of startups come up within this sphere. So I do believe that there is a lot of positive development that can come with this transition, and India has high ambitions. And India has a very good trajectory towards a green transition. So eventually also the electric vehicles will be powered by green energy. So that may also help the air pollution here in Delhi, for example. So I think that there is a lot to learn from a conversation like today with other countries, and that we can collaborate and that we can find solutions together and move forward towards an electric vehicle transition, despite of the geopolitical challenges that we may
of
face.
course, there is clear like-mindedness. As you said, the genesis of Ola's EV brands as well. It was a European company that was acquired, and of course, that was, I think that was a transferable battery, but that was later converted. The whole scooter was converted into a fixed battery scooter. But Nick, I would like to ask you, when we speak about EV diplomacy, give us a sense of what India and Australia can do together.
Well, look, I spoke a little bit about the role that we can play in terms of supplying critical minerals into your EV industry here, and that's something that, as you noted, is underway. We do currently export some of those materials here to India, but we're hopeful that there'll be greater volumes coming, and we
like,
again.
For example, when we have Quad, can the Quad work towards some sort of strengthening of EV supply chains in the entire Indo-Pacific region?
Yes, look, the Quad, as again some of your viewers will know, it has a rather complicated sounding program called the Quad Clean Energy Supply Chain Diversification Program. And Australia, along with the other 3 countries involved in the Quad, has kicked in 27 crore rupees, or about $50 million in our currency. And what that will do is it will encourage Australian private sector enterprises to partner with local organisations in South Asia, across ASEAN and the Pacific, and fund joint projects that are looking at solar, EV, batteries, etc. So there's one specific concrete example of where the Quad, I think, is seeking to do just that.
Right. Christine, if we were to ask you about the ambition on electric vehicles and what UK and India can do together in the region, in South Asia, in other emerging and vulnerable nations, what would that be? And frankly, if India wants to take that leadership role in electric vehicle manufacturing, in supporting and being a reliable partner for the world in EVs, what are some of the regulatory changes that we need to bring? And that would be possibly my question to all panelists here. Norway has an excellent experience of transitioning to EVs. So does UK with automobiles, Australia. I would like to ask you, from UK's point of view, what can India do to make itself a more lucrative destination for EV manufacturing and also being a reliable supplier?
Well, India's already doing a lot, and we've heard from ministers and people better qualified than me to talk about the India story. One of the things India's doing, which is great, is leaning into the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council, which is an international grouping which was set up by the UK and by the US, which is precisely looking at these kind of cross-cutting, cross-boundary issues and thinking about how we can work together to push forward low-emission vehicles. And we've just, at the last COP that was just announced, was a new partnership between the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council and India, a new partnership agreement, which is going to see India do work in third countries and to support this agenda. So it's already happening. I think there's more we can do. I think bilaterally, like others, there are areas where the UK or South Africa or Australia have expertise and skills, where India's incredible innovative manufacturing capability can help us transition front scales or R&D, whether that's in battery recycling or extracting critical minerals in a sustainable way, and working with Indian expertise to sort of scale that up and take that to the world. So I think those are the possible examples.
Right. Nick, if I were to ask you again, because in your opening remarks, you showed us the map and you focused on the lithium reserves that Australia has, but what, according to you, would be the major challenges that you see for Australia at the moment? China does not have the kind of lithium reserves which Argentina, Bolivia, Australia might have, but they control the processing of lithium in a big way, 70 to 75% of that. That definitely poses a challenge to the rest of the world, to manufacturers and to nations. How is Australia trying to overcome that and becoming self-reliant and stronger in its own way on that front in the coming years?
Well, look, challenging question, another challenging question from you, Parikshit, but look, Australia is looking to partner with countries with whom it enjoys close and productive relationships, and India is one of those countries. We do not produce electric vehicles in Australia. It's something that our government is thinking deeply about in terms of manufacturing more in Australia, not electric vehicles as far as I understand, but we, like India, our government recently announced a future made in Australia, a bit like your Make in India. And there is another opportunity for our two governments to look together. Our Prime Minister met your Prime Minister last month in the margins of the G20 in Rio, and they agreed that there were synergies between those two projects. And certainly in our case, there is good incentives to encourage investments in the critical minerals industry in Australia. So I'm going to tack away from tackling the question about China and processing and just say that Australia is thinking deeply about the challenges that countries with whom we enjoy close relations are facing as well, and we're looking to deepen cooperation, including with India, in and around these challenges.
Right. Laghu, give us a sense of what India can do in terms of a partner in South Asia, in Indo-Pacific, in African Union. With the used automobile manufacturing base that we can have, what can we do? And especially, what our Deputy High Commissioner from South Africa had to say, they would like Indian companies to go and manufacture. And friendshoring, onshoring, that is the big theme right now. When we think about that, what can India do to be a leader in EV technology?
So, as far as you know, I thought 60% of the two-wheeler market in Africa is Indian companies, okay, which is already very well established ecosystem, I would say, and India is leading in the African market. And what I can see is that with a less complex powertrain and assembly line the EV has, it become more and more opportunity for the EV industry in India to explore such market. With the innovation and the startups we have, like including Ola and Ather, I think it's a huge market established. And another area where I found is the electric buses, okay, which can now, I remember we used to have 2 to 3 companies. Now we have series of 8 to 9 companies manufacturing in India the e-buses. So it's time to go outside crossing the borders. And one area which I think is where we can work is the standardization and the quality products. Okay, we need the products which are in terms of standards and specification at par with the global standards, because so that we are not only manufacturing for India, we are manufacturing for the globe. Okay, and that will make a major difference, because you cannot have a 2 different assembly line and a manufacturing line. And that's where we need to work upon. And I think we are already in that direction. So it's not that we are not working.
Let me just take that question with Martin as well. Martin, one way that Norway achieved that 96-98% EV registration mark was through very streamlined regulations. But if you had to standardize this or work towards standardization across jurisdictions, countries you want to do more EV business with, what would be the starting point? Is there any conversation with countries like India or countries in the African Union for that matter?
I think that's an excellent question, and of course that would help a lot with the standardized standards and regulations. I think one lesson that we have in Norway is that the consumers themselves, they organized and they were very active, partnering with the government, partnering with the industry to make sure that they could actually benefit from being EV drivers. So I think mobilizing also the consumers, the buyers of the vehicles, that is definitely something that has worked in Norway, and I believe that might work elsewhere as well.
Right. Ambassador Bambavle, if we were to ask you to put your diplomatic hat on, give us a sense of what can be the right strategy for India's EV diplomatic push. Like we were talking about having a one nation, one EV policy for India, to have a cohesive regulation across the country, can we have a very strong EV diplomacy policy or EV export policy through which we can actually be a winner in the EV transition around the world?
No, I think, the government would have to assist in the first steps, the first stages of the exports of Indian EVs. I think the government of India will have to come in and help out in some kind of subsidy for the consumers and for the producers. But that would be a short period of time. I think we're competitive enough and we have the scale at which we will be manufacturing soon, where we'll be very competitive with other countries and we will be able to sell and export to other countries, not only in the global south, but also in the north. But eventually, I completely agree with the Deputy High Commissioner of South Africa that the answer will be to go there to other countries and set up our own manufacturing capabilities there, because that is the only option. You can't keep on exporting from home. So I think that is a 10-year strategy that the government of India would have to assist private industry in India. I think private industry in India is up to the challenge, but a little bit of hand-holding will be required in the early stages, but then later on, I'm sure private Indian industry will be able to run on its own.
Right. Let me take closing remarks from all our panelists. Let me begin with Christine. Christine, give us your thoughts about how UK views these geopolitical tensions around electric vehicles, and how does it plan to secure itself for the future?
I think we see them as opportunities, or we try to see them as opportunities. And, why we're all sitting on this platform, why we're all here and worrying about these issues is because we share the same objectives and goals in terms of a net zero transition. And we can only do that by being really bold. We can only do that through incredible innovation. We can only do that through sort of unprecedented collaboration and partnership. And that's what we're all talking about, really, in different ways. And, you know, I came here today in a Jaguar I-Pace vehicle, which is, you know, great British company now owned by an Indian company, creating an absolute top-of-the-range electric vehicle. I think about the Tata investments into the UK. You know, the UK can only go on its journey.
How can you forget Royal Enfield?
Well, there's the long list. But the UK can only make its, you know, zero carbon commitments if it partners, and we see India as absolutely the top of the list for us in terms of partnerships, and so it's a relationship that goes both ways. We all stand to benefit from this sort of collaboration.
Right. Cedric, your final thoughts, and something that you'd like all of us to think about when we speak about EV diplomacy. It's often very easy to say things, but getting things on paper, getting things done is difficult. Tell us about your aspiration.
Yeah. No, I think what we would want to see is that Africa should not only be viewed as a victim of climate change to which it has not contributed. Africa can play a role in driving our quest for a reduced carbon footprint through our economic activity. Africa is not only the consumer of your products, but wants to be a key role player, an active participant, whether it is in the manufacturing of these vehicles, these batteries, the beneficiation of its critical minerals. It is not the Africa of 50 years ago, and so I think we need to change our mindset on how we view Africa. South Africa will certainly use the G20 presidency to articulate this position and to make sure that Africa becomes a central player. Because you see, if you look at growth and economic growth in future, it will be Asia, largely driven by India, and the African continent, with its massive population and potential market that will drive economic growth. So do not see Africa as a liability, as a recipient only, but as a partner that can be equal to the task of this transition into a greener economy. I think that is what I want to leave with you.
No, I think a big round of applause for that. And you know, I would just like to say and add to that, Cedric, that when it comes to the African Union, South Africa, for example, be it Reliance Industries, be it Bharti Airtel, be it Mahindra and Mahindra, for Bajaj Auto, TVS, Ola, you know, all these companies, Africa is such a big market. There's so much more to be done. But as Ambassador and you also said, when we speak about EV diplomacy, you also have to think about the aspirations of the other nation and what the other country wants. Nick, if we were to ask you about what India and Australia could do in terms of clean mobility, zero-emission vehicles for the future, what would be the roadmap? We're discussing the next phase of our trade cooperation. What kind of avenues would that open up?
Well, look, much like Christina, the job of the High Commission here in New Delhi, you know, is to look for areas where we have expertise or raw materials and work as closely as possible with India in the greater game in terms of, you know, net zero and green economy. And, you know, there are some prospective areas where we are doing things. You said a bit earlier, rather than just talking about these things, what, you know, delivery, doing things. So if I can just provide as my final point, one specific example, Australia and India last month announced a renewable energy partnership. So that looks good on paper, but what are we actually going to do? And I'm pleased to say that during the course of next year, we will be establishing in partnership with India a rooftop solar academy, which is going to train thousands of Indian solar technicians to feed directly into your Prime Minister's goal to have 10 million rooftop solar units. And so there's a specific example of an outcome from a shared desire and goal.
Right. Laghu, I'll put a tricky question to you. India has been slightly slow in finalizing FTAs. Do you feel when you speak about increased EV exports, more EV diplomacy, The first question is drop trade barriers, make it more open to do business.
Tough for me to answer, you're right actually. I really don't have, as a bank, we believe in the free trade, but as a country, I would say I'm not allowed to answer such kind of, I will be a bit hesitant to answer, but I'll pass on to my other panelists to be very frank.
Okay, any one thought that you'd like to leave us with? We've got panelists from Europe, UK, India, the African Union. What can we do together in order to have a very strong supply chain of electric vehicles and then support the needs of each other as well?
So, as a World Bank, where we play a role is connecting the dots, okay? So everybody is there, probably we have an overarching view, okay, because we have a global presence. And for many, we are a development lending institution, but we are a knowledge institution too, okay? World Bank is hugely invest into the knowledge, resource mobilization to the knowledge. We support the countries across the globe in with a common agenda of climate change mitigation and those, decarbonization of transportation and decarbonization of industry and all those things. And every country has a different priorities. Every country has a different socio-economic, political circumstances. How to customize all those policies and regulations, that's the one area. And when it comes on diplomacy, the question which you're asking, we would rather work on a knowledge diplomacy, okay? So when we have a knowledge from Norway, we have a knowledge from India, how it can be transferred, and one region can leverage the knowledge from the other region. That's where our larger role is, okay? And that's I would say that's the first advantage as a global institution we have. The lending and everything comes later, okay? The knowledge diplomacy comes first, okay? I can always learn from the Norway, but the India and Africa may have different priorities. India is leading in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and the bus market, while Norway is leading into the car market. So, but there is something to learn, but it has to be replicated in a different way, probably in the other region, and that's where we play the role.
Yeah, because countries in Africa, such as South Africa and even India, they are much bigger than Norway, much denser in terms of population, and city to city things change completely. And the weather, of course, sometimes can be not so conducive either. But Ambassador Bambable, my final set of questions to both you and Martin. What I'd like to ask you, Ambassador Bambable, is what can the private sector do? We often keep asking what governments can do in terms of having incentives for EVs, policies, and work with other countries. But what can the private sector do to support this EV transition globally?
Well, what the private sector can do, and which it is attempting to do, is to lower costs and improve efficiency. And I think in the EV space, we are beginning to see that. And as scales increase, you will see that costs get even lower. And as we adopt a faster EV technology in India and contribute to a green Bharat, we will also be contributing to a greener Earth and a greener globe.
Right. Martin, final thoughts as Ola, Norway is winning its EV transition. You've got a Norway pension fund. Clearly, you have the technology, you've got the experience and the money. What does Norway now want to offer the world? And final thoughts that you'd like to leave all our panelists with.
Thank you so much, and I believe that all of us on this panel, we really commend India for their high ambitions when it comes to zero emissions, when it comes to the green transition, and I believe we are all here to collaborate and to help as much as we can, because it's not only for India, but it's actually for the rest of us that India succeeds. So when it comes to the EV transition, Norway, the government, the EV Association of Private Car Holders, the Norwegian businesses, we are all eager to share our experience and to help as much as we can and to collaborate to also gain more experience and more knowledge from our part. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bambable, Martin, Laghu, Nick, Cedric, and Christine for joining us on the panel. It's been a thorough masterclass from top diplomats and the World Bank on how to win the EV diplomacy battle in a volatile geopolitical environment. And interesting times. We've got Trump in the White House, and things are only going to get more interesting in the months to come. Thank you for watching.
Ola Electric presents Green Bharat, an initiative by Network 18.